Thank you. So I will try to leave plenty of time for questions since I generally manage to spur a few of them. Thank you all for coming. It's good to see some familiar faces, and particularly from alumni of both my microeconomics course and my energy and environmental markets course. For those of you who have taken the energy and environmental markets course, some of this will sound familiar. I'm going to talk today about something that everybody's hearing about if you were paying attention to the news at all, which is the change in the technologies for producing oil and natural gas. And these changes have come about primarily in the last 5 years, and primarily in the United States, or at least the U.S. has been the leader in these changes so far, and have opened up new areas for potential oil and gas exploration and production, and lowered the cost of producing those goods. And I'm going to talk about what effect that's actually going to have on energy markets. So just to give you a quick reminder, this is U.S. natural gas production, and you can see, is that what that does? Yes. You can see that around 2006, 2007, we actually were dropping off, and then we had this change associated with what's generally known as fracking, or hydraulic fracturing. That's a new technology for extracting gas. I actually thought about showing you a little video of how it worked, but that would suggest that I actually understand how it works, and I don't. Just to remind you, I'm an economist, but essentially it involves fracturing rock deep underground to release natural gas that is trapped there. And that's been the primary change. This is just shale gas production, which is gas using this new technology. And you can see it was about zero even as recently as 2005, and it has just taken off. And you may have heard of the Marcellus Shale and the Bakken deposits, which are now major producers of natural gas. In fact, it's gotten to the point now that about half of the gas, more than half of the gas, is unconventional. It's either shale gas or falls under what's called tight gas, which is closely related, or there's a new move to capture coal bed methane, which is expanding, although that's much more recently. And so we are seeing a lot of gas that just wasn't available in the market before, in the US market. And that's great. It's brought gas prices way down, as I will talk about, and it's created a lot of value. The same thing's been going on in the oil market, though it started later, and it hasn't caught on quite as much yet, but a lot of the same technologies can be used to extract oil and are starting to be used. And so you can see this is US oil production, that it was dropping into just a couple years ago, and it has now started increasing, and this is a year out of date, but the last year of data are even stronger. So production has gone up even more. In fact, this is just one consulting firm's forecast, but they give 3 forecasts: a high case, a base case, and a low case. And even the low case is showing a lot of growth over the next few years. The US is going to be producing a lot more oil. There's talk, although it's easy to make up stories in any direction, but there is talk that the US may, in a decade or two, produce enough oil that we will not need to import oil at all. That is, we will be a net zero producer, or a net zero importer. There's also talk that's confusing a lot of people that we're already exporting gasoline and refined products, which is true and has nothing to do with our oil production. That's actually in the refining sector, and it is the case that because of the drop in US gasoline consumption and the demand for diesel in Europe, it's become economic to ship those refined products to Europe. But much of the oil being used to make those products is actually still being brought in. So that has nothing to do with energy independence. That has to do with having a big refining sector relative to our domestic needs now. So I'm going to talk about what does this mean for our energy challenges, and that's not a typo, the S, because people often talk about the energy challenge, and then when you press them on it, their definition is whatever they want to focus on, and different people focus on different things. and claim different things are solutions. So let me talk about 4 challenges we face. One is the one that gets in the news the most, which is simply the cost of energy. One of the roles I play here at Haas is as probably the most frequent media face of the school. And most of the interviews I do are when the price of gasoline goes up. I go on the television and I'm on for 6 seconds saying, the price of gasoline has gone up because oil prices went up. And I'm fine with that, as long as they put Haas School of Business under my name, because when they just put Berkeley, UC Berkeley economist, I get a call from Rich Lyon saying, we need the name there on the screen. And usually they do, and I sort of press them on it. And it doesn't take, I've become very efficient. If you do any of these interviews or you find yourself doing them, do them outside where the lighting is good and they don't need much setup time. Make sure they're there before you are. Show up, do the interview, leave. I can do it now in 5 minutes. And it used to take much longer than that. So the cost of energy is what gets on the news. That's the thing that the people seem to really react to. That is also the thing that people in Congress seem to react to the most. They seem to pay the most attention to, unfortunately, in some cases. Energy security, which I'm going to talk about, this is a phrase that means whatever you want it to mean, and I'll come back and talk about at least 3 different meanings that are commonly used. But it has something to do vaguely with producing more of the energy we consume. Local pollution from energy use, certainly if we had been talking about this 10 or 12 years ago, this would have been what we meant by pollution. Rather than climate change, we would have been talking about smog, NOx, acid rain, those sorts of issues, rather than CO2 and greenhouse gases. And those are still issues. They're less an issue in the United States because we've done so much to address them. If you've seen the pictures of Beijing in the last few months, they are still an issue in many cities in the developing world. And finally, climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, which need to move to the forefront of our concerns. And I'm going to spend a fair amount of today talking about how that might happen. So let me just talk about costs. Well, it's really great news that the US can produce a lot of oil. That's going to have almost no effect on the price of gasoline. People don't like this fact, but it is a fact. The oil companies spend a lot of time when the price of oil goes up explaining it's not their fault because we live in a world oil market and the price is set in this world market, and that's true. One of the implications of that is that when we start producing a lot more oil, that lot more oil the US is producing turns out to be a little more oil in the world market, and as a result turns out to have a pretty small effect on the world price of oil. So we're not going to see much change from just the change in the US production of oil. Even if we're, as we are talking about, going from 6 million or 5 million barrels a day production to 9 or 10 million, that would, a 4 million barrel a day production change in the United States, almost doubling US production, would be about a 5% change in world production. So it would have a little effect on oil prices, but that sort of change over a decade, as we're talking about, would probably have a pretty minor effect. What could have a big effect is this, as this technology spreads worldwide. The same technologies that are creating an oil boom in North Dakota are going to spread to other parts of the world. By the way, they're also going to spread to California. For those of you who aren't aware, possibly the largest shale oil production area deposit in the United States is the Monterey Shale deposit in the Central Valley of California. It is not in Monterey Bay, just to avoid the confusion, since 2 people have already asked me about that recently. But it's called the Monterey Shale deposit. It is in the Central Valley. California is right now talking about how to exploit it and whether to exploit it, and that's going to be a continuing issue. For now, the gains are going to go primarily to oil producers. That means oil companies that manage to use this technology and produce more oil. It also means workers. The unemployment rate in North Dakota is below 3% right now because of the shale deposit. Not just people working directly on in the oil fields, but also people who are employed in hotels, in food service, and in all the support areas. For those of us who follow this closely, it's been interesting to watch a state go through a boom so rapidly that they don't have housing to keep up, they don't have services to keep up, they don't have public services to keep up. And so the area in western North Dakota of the Bakken deposit is incredibly strained in all sorts of markets right now. There is one exception that somebody might have thought of and that I will address quickly, and that is what's happened in oil markets in the Midwest in the United States. So this oil from the Bakken deposit in western North Dakota flows into the pipes that run down through the middle of the United States. And you would expect to end up at the base of the Mississippi and in the Gulf Coast area where there's a lot of refining capacity. The problem is, between the oil that's coming out of North Dakota and the oil that's coming out of the tar sands area in Alberta in Canada, which also normally flows down through the same pipes, there's too much oil coming out of that part of the country to be accommodated in the current transportation system. So the pipelines are actually backed up in the Midwest. And as a result, there's a glut of oil in the Midwest. I recently did some research on this because the one question you might ask is, well, if there's a glut of oil in the Midwest, who are the winners and who are the losers? And it turns out the glut of oil has pushed down the price of oil in that Midwest basin relative to the Gulf Coast and relative to the rest of the world. And sometimes it's pushed it down a huge amount. So where the world price has been $100 to $110 a barrel, the price around the Canadian tar sands and around the North Dakota Bakken deposit has been as low as $50 or $60 a barrel. And that's all because there's just no way to get it out, to get all of it out. So you would think, well, if the price of oil is that cheap in the Midwest, at least somebody's getting the benefits of cheap oil, and somebody is. The somebody is the refineries in the Midwest. So the refineries are buying cheap oil, but still selling expensive gasoline. How can they do that? Well, it turns out although you can't get oil out of the Midwest, you can easily still get refined products in and out of the Midwest. So the gasoline market is completely integrated with the rest of the country. So of course, they're not going to sell it any more cheaply in the Midwest if they could easily ship it somewhere else and sell it elsewhere. So it's sort of a bummer from the consumer's point of view. Oil is cheap in the Midwest, but gasoline is just as expensive as it ever was relative to the rest of the country. It's a little cheaper because they have lower taxes on average, but it is not actually cheaper as a result of the cheap oil. Natural gas is a different story. Natural gas is much harder to ship around the world. You've probably heard about liquefied natural gas shipments. It turns out that that's really expensive to do. It's expensive both to build the facilities to ship the gas, and it actually requires more energy to keep it compressed while you're shipping it. And so this is a real discouragement to long-distance shipping that you don't do through pipelines, that is, anything overseas. And the result of that is we've seen a big drop in US gas prices. So this is sort of a great teaching contrast that oil production in the United States has not pushed down US oil prices except for this glut I mentioned in the Midwest. But natural gas, the boom in natural gas production has pushed down natural gas prices. And the reason is we can't get it out of the country very easily. Now, part of that is technical constraints. It's costly to move it. There aren't enough facilities. But part of it is legal constraints. And we're seeing a really fascinating fight right now between the big industrial natural gas users who don't want the gas shipped out of the country because they want to keep it locked in order to keep gas prices low, and the producers who, of course, want to sell it for the highest price they can. And so the producers are lobbying, and I think ultimately will be successful to be allowed to ship the gas elsewhere in the world. Some of the buyers, and think of the big petrochemical companies who use gas to produce chemicals, are saying, well, we should keep the gas here in order to create jobs in manufacturing. And it's sort of, and I'm sure you've heard this argument, it's sort of a seductive argument at first, but it's got some real problems with it. One is that the United States has, for the last 75 years, been relying on energy imports in order to keep our economy going. And we've been relying on other countries not taking exactly the action that is now being proposed by countries here. That is, locking in their energy supplies in order to have a cost advantage in production. And in fact, just in the last couple of years, we faced this with China. China, it turns out, is a producer of rare earth elements that go into a lot of products that are particularly electronics. And turns out China has a lot of the rare earths in the world, or at least a lot of what's being mined right now. We probably can find it elsewhere. And about 2 years ago, China said, well, why should we ship the rare earths overseas? If we keep them here, we can pull the entire electronics business into China as people use those rare earths to produce more electronics here. And the US filed a complaint along with the Europeans at the WTO saying that you shouldn't be allowed to do that. You're using your natural resources as a competitive advantage in other industries by blocking free trade. Does this sound familiar? And yet there are some of the same politicians who were adamant that we had to go after China for blocking trade in rare earth elements, who now are saying we have to lock in US gas in order to get a competitive advantage. And the hypocrisy of it is starting, I think, to become a little more evident. By the way, those same petrochemical companies that now are saying we shouldn't have export terminals in order to ship our gas out of the country, 7 years ago were saying we got to build import terminals. This was before we found all the gas, in order to get gas into the country. So they're for free trade in one direction. Japan's price of natural gas is around $16 per million BTU right now. Ours is around $4. Japan, remember, is an ally and is a very resource-poor country. And Japan is probably the primary source of dispute right now. We actually have free trade agreements with South Korea and with a number of other countries, and under US law, nobody can block sales of natural gas to those places. Japan, we do not have a free trade agreement with yet, although there is discussion of it. And they are the primary source of dispute right now of whether companies should be allowed to sell their gas into Japan. The value, when we're using gas as if it's worth $4 and the Japanese have to face gas at $16, you can see right away that they are foregoing uses of gas that are a lot more valuable than our incremental uses of gas. And so as a result, the Japanese are very anxious to get a more open natural gas market. Much of this price differential is due to real shipping costs, but some of it is due to legal barriers. This is not going to be a US-only phenomenon. In fact, while there are huge shale gas deposits in the United States, it's estimated there are probably larger shale gas deposits in China. The Chinese are at least a few years behind us in exploiting those shale gas deposits. They are, in fact, trying to set up partnerships now with US companies to buy the intellectual property to learn how to do it. And they're going to figure out how to do it, and they're going to be producing a lot more natural gas. So all these terms of trade are going to shift again. And so having a consistent policy on them as they shift is probably a good idea. Energy security. People talk a lot about energy security. Let me give you 3 possible definitions that are not completely ridiculous. There are plenty of ridiculous ones. One is this idea of being less vulnerable to macroeconomic shocks. And this is probably the one that is most commonly referred to. The idea is, and it particularly applies to oil, if you are importing a resource that has very volatile prices, then when the price goes up, your economy takes a hit as a whole. Not just individuals, but everybody in the economy gets poorer at the same time. You remember from your macroeconomics class that that's a bad thing. And that's when you start getting multiplier effects. And so there's a real concern that if you're very dependent on this resource, the economy is less secure because you're importing it. The contrast here, by the way, is interesting with natural gas, where the US has been almost self-sufficient for many years. And North America, with Canada, has been self-sufficient. And when the price of natural gas has gone up, we've been much less worried about a recession as a result, because although you're paying more for natural gas, producers of natural gas are also part of the economy, and they're getting richer, and that money's recirculating. The problem occurs much more with oil, because when you pay more, a lot of that wealth actually leaves the continent, leaves the at least the tighter part of the US economy. The second definition is supply constraints. The concern that you're actually going to hit a point where you don't have enough gas. This is really not an issue with oil. Oil is shipped very easily. It's stored very easily. We don't really run out of oil except for the cases where usually government regulation creates some disruption in the process. But in natural gas, it can happen, and you do see it happen. Particularly in the Northeast, we see it happen on really cold winters, during really cold winters, where you can't get enough gas into that area. And that actually can cause a disruption. I had a personal experience with this, by the way. It was a result of regulation, but in the 1970s, because of US gas regulation, gas production went way down. And I started, although Julie said that I finished at Berkeley, I actually started my college career at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. Fine college, but it was in Northfield, Minnesota. So after a couple of years, I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. And I dropped out, and I actually moved to the Twin Cities. This was January of 1977. And in January of 1977 was exactly when the natural gas crunch hit, because the US hadn't been producing much because primarily of price regulation. And the Twin Cities ran out of natural gas. So I really got this firsthand experience of what happens when you get an energy shock. Because I remember very clearly the governor was Rudy Perpich. And Governor Perpich came on and said, we're running out of natural gas. Everybody in the state should turn their thermostats to 55 during the day and 50 at night, which is pretty cold to live in. And they started shutting down factories. So I was, after my sophomore year in college, looking for some job, and unemployment in the Twin Cities went to 30% overnight. And that's why I ended up at Berkeley. Not the whole reason, but I decided at that point to move back to Berkeley. So those are the sort of economic disruptions that can occur. And there, the increased production of natural gas is a help, although there was enough production of natural gas in the entire North American continent already that we weren't really seeing much in the way of constraints. A third that we don't talk about very much anymore is enriching hostile nations. It's not that it isn't occurring. In fact, if you look at the extra revenue that Iran earns from a $100 a barrel price versus a $50 a barrel price, the billions of dollars they earn swamp the money they're spending on Hezbollah and Hamas and other support for organizations like that. So it's a lot of money, and there is concern that hostile nations might spend it in ways that are not in our best interest. It turns out there's also relatively little we can do about that as a country. It may be that if there's worldwide oil production increases, that we will see a price drop overall. And I'm going to talk more about what might happen with some of the substitution as energy use expands. So the fines have been, the new technologies are going to be a big help on the first, and that's probably the biggest point. On the second point, the supply constraints will get some help, but there wasn't really much of a supply constraint in the United States anyway. On the third, US consumption is probably not large enough that the sort of changes in production we're going to have are going to cause a big drop in world oil prices, as I said. And as a result, anybody producing oil makes money. Local pollution. This is great news to the extent that natural gas is replacing coal. On all sorts of dimensions, coal is a really, really polluting energy source. And particularly the coal that is being used in the developing world, which tends to be an even dirtier type of coal and less well filtered in the effluent. But even in the United States, replacing coal with natural gas is a big improvement in terms of local pollution. The bad news that I'm going to get to is I'm not convinced that that's going to last very long. In fact, you may have heard that last summer, the United States reached a point where we were producing more electricity with natural gas than we were with coal for the first time in decades. That's over already. We're now, the price of natural gas has come up a little bit, and now we're back to producing more with coal again. So it will have some effect, but I think it can be overstated. To the extent that we are substituting natural gas for oil, that would also be a positive. It's unclear how much of that we're going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit more. The place we're going to see natural gas substitution for oil is in transportation. It is clear that if prices stay where they are right now, your next car should be a natural gas car rather than a gasoline car. You'll really save a huge amount of money. It is unclear that prices are going to stay where they are right now. And it is probably clear that we can't all do that and prices still stay where they are, which I'll get back to. The big unknown is that the local pollution from these new production processes, there's a lot of uncertainty about fracking. There's a lot of uncertainty about these technologies. There are claims from the industry, which are probably true, that done right and carefully, these processes can be done with relatively little environmental impact, but there are also plenty of instances where it hasn't been done right. The claim is that those are mostly small mom and pop wells and operations, and that may be true, but we haven't gotten to the point of actually doing the regulation in a way that's going to make everybody happy. The good news on that front is I think actually there is an industry government consensus that we can get there, and what we need to do is pay a lot more attention to getting the regulation right early before we start running into a lot of problems. Okay, let me talk about climate change and greenhouse gases and put this in that context and spend the rest actually of the talk focused on this, because this is where my main concern is these days. The good scenario, which you hear occasionally, is that natural gas replaces coal because there's so much gas around now, and maybe even oil. It reduces, natural gas is not greenhouse gas free. When it replaces coal, it cuts emissions by about 50%. When it replaces oil, it cuts emissions from tailpipes by about 25%. That's progress. If that's all you can do, though, we don't get to where most scientists say we need to get to. And so a lot of people are talking about this as a transition, that you get 10 to 20 years using a lot more natural gas, and during that time you develop other alternatives and they get cheap enough to eventually replace natural gas. Where other alternatives could include nuclear power, it could include carbon sequestration from, you actually still burn the coal, but you capture the carbon. The things that aren't there yet. And that's the optimistic scenario. Those of you who know me know that's not where I'm going to end up. The bad scenario is natural gas isn't quite cheap enough to beat coal. And oil prices drop to meet gas for transportation. And unfortunately, I would call this the realistic scenario. The fracked gas is not as cheap as we saw in the last couple of years. It may get cheaper. In fact, one of my themes is going to be everything's going to get cheaper because technology goes forward. But the idea that we're going to get gas down to $2, where it got to last year, on a long-run basis, we are not there yet. The technology is not there, and it's not clear it will get there. And that's when it really started swapping out for coal. The other point, which is one that just doesn't get enough appreciation, is that oil prices are going to be pretty sensitive over the period of years or decades to demand shifts. So if you start looking at the current price of gasoline and the current price of natural gas and say, boy, a natural gas car looks great, and it does at those prices, you're right. But you're betting that that's where the relative prices are going to stay. And if you're the only one who does this, they may stay there. But if a lot of people start doing this swapping out, and the price of oil and the demand for oil drops, this is the situation you get. Because we think that over sort of the decade range, there's a lot of pretty cheap oil supply, and then there's some that's just on the margin that's pretty expensive. And we saw this. We saw this in 2008 when the world economy went down. The price of oil plunged. So we saw a small shift in the demand. You were hoping you weren't going to have to see demand and supply curve. We saw a small shift in demand and a huge drop in price. And that's the point that we haven't focused on enough. It's actually going to be fairly easy to drive out the last little bit of oil consumption. But if you really want to drive oil out of the market, if you want to invent an alternative fuel that's really economic to change the world, not just to make money for your company, it's got to not only beat this stuff, it's got to beat all this stuff. And there's still a lot of this stuff. And this is the cheap oil that already exists and that is going to get cheaper in the future. So that changes or affects the possibilities of natural gas really beating oil in the long run, because natural gas is actually going to have to be, if you're going to have a major change, is going to have to actually beat the cheap oil, not just the current price of gasoline. People say, well, that may not be the whole story because, look, fossil fuels are finite. They are a depletable resource. They are, but two things about that. Although I don't agree with a lot of the things being said against Keystone XL, the pipeline, it is true that if you actually pulled all of the CO2 out from these deposits, not just the Canadian tar sands, but lots, there's a lot of greenhouse gases in there. We got to find a solution before we hit the finiteness of fossil fuels. If that's the constraint, we're going to put a lot of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and if unless the vast, vast majority of scientists really have it completely wrong, we're going to cause a huge change in the climate. I'm not reassured by the finiteness of fossil fuels that we're going to actually make progress on reducing greenhouse gases, because alternative energy technologies will get cheaper, but as we have seen now, particularly over the last 5 years, and I've been saying even before then, fossil fuel technologies are going to get cheaper too. And in fact, there's a lot more money to be made figuring out a cheaper way to pull fossil fuels out of the ground than working on alternative energy technologies right now. So there's huge investments being made in all of these alternative ways of extracting and using hydrocarbons. And so that is racing against the alternative technologies. When we think about the progress in alternatives, that's great, but we have to recognize it's a race between those two technologies, and there's plenty of progress being made. You're aware of tar sands, you're aware of deep offshore drilling, you may be aware of tight oil, which is the implementation of the same sorts of fracking technologies to oil. You may not be aware of methane hydrate, which New York Times had a big article on this. The Japanese are working on, which is another source of hydrocarbon that potentially can be extracted from undersea and would release greenhouse gases, and is, at least according to one estimate, more abundant than all the hydrocarbons that we have found so far. So it would be, if it weren't for greenhouse gases, a great breakthrough, this new source of energy. But if it's releasing greenhouse gases, it could be a real problem. And all that research is going to continue. And we're going to get better at drilling deep offshore wells. 10 years ago, we were not drilling 30,000-foot wells. Now we are. 10 or 15, 20 years ago, the economics of extracting oil from the tar sands really weren't there. Technology's gotten better. And of course, tight oil, the fracking technology. So these technologies are improving, and that's the race. Just in case you aren't sobered enough, this is actually a few years old, but the news has only gotten worse. This is all hydrocarbons that one could use for oil. There's conventional oil. This black part is what we've already used in the history of mankind. This is the conventional oil left. This is with enhanced oil recovery. This is from the tar sands. This is converting gas to liquid. This is converting coal to liquid. This is sort of a wild guess because coal is probably not actually a limited resource, particularly if you've ever been to Australia where they burn peat. They're pretty much just digging up dirt and burning it. And if you're going to do that, you can release a lot of greenhouse gases and other pollutants. And then finally, proving that this is this is from 2007, this is oil shale. And back then, when Brandt and Farrell wrote this paper, those were the range of estimates of oil shale extraction, and they have definitely gone down since then. I found this graph actually on a website of an organization that is essentially a peak oil. We're going to save ourselves from climate change by running out of oil. And this is their claim, well, there's this cheap oil, but then you start getting into more expensive oil. These numbers are pretty exaggerated, how much this costs. And then you get into deep oil and Canadian oil sands. But what's not on this graph, even if you believe these numbers, which you shouldn't, is that all these numbers are drastically lower than they were 10 years ago. All these numbers that are here now were here 10 years ago. And they've all gotten cheaper because the technology's gotten better. So all the technologies for extracting those sorts of unconventional oils are getting better too. Okay, so what should we do about it? By the way, thank you for coming to this talk today. I know there are more uplifting things you could be doing. But they asked me to talk, so I figured I'd tell you what I think. We should be pricing greenhouse gases. We need either a cap and trade market or a tax on greenhouse gases. But I have to tell you, and for those of you former students who have heard me rant about this, well, I still think we should be doing this. It's really less and less my focus these days, even though I serve on the Emissions Market Assessment Committee, because I am less and less convinced that we have the political will to actually do it. And the fact is that if you really are going to make a difference by pricing greenhouse gases, it has to be a pretty high price. The numbers that we talk about in carbon prices in California, we're talking about a $12, $15 per ton. Back when the federal government used to talk about doing something about climate change, they were talking about a $20 or $30 a ton. To give you an idea, $20 a ton adds 18 cents a gallon at the pump. If you think there's going to be a large change in oil consumption based on 18 cents a gallon, you haven't looked at the ups and downs we've seen over the last few years. So it would take a pretty high price because the technology, remember, for producing that stuff is going to keep getting better. Yes, it is true. The alternatives are going to get better too. We are going to get better at producing cellulosic ethanol, but it's still pretty expensive. And remember back to that price, that supply curve of oil, you got to drive out not just the last 10%, but all the cheap oil too. We need to stick with it even after the shunned fossil fuels get cheap, particularly oil. And so that's the point of that graph I showed you, that if we actually succeeded in having a significant price on carbon, and we actually started driving down the price of, driving down usage of oil, the price of oil would collapse, and the price differential would go way up. And so whereas maybe $100 a ton at current prices would be enough to get a huge switch, It wouldn't be if the price of oil went back down to $20 a barrel, which I think is a completely plausible outcome if we were able to take 20 or 30% out of world demand for oil. Actually, it may be even cheaper than that based on what happened in the 90s. The politics of this we know are tough in the developed economies. Yes, Europe has a trading system. No, it's not really doing anything. The price is $3 a ton. It has a lot of loopholes in it. I still think it was a good start, but in some ways I think it makes the point how difficult it is to move forward to actually making big changes. The US has, as we know, done almost nothing. California is trying to do something, but it turns out to be very difficult to control greenhouse gases when you can't control your borders, which a state by the US Constitution is not allowed to. So it's very difficult to do anything about greenhouse gases on a state level basis. But when you get to the developing world, it's just much harder. So I was at a conference in India 2 years ago with the then, and had lunch with the then chief climate negotiator for India. He remained the chief climate negotiator for 1 more month after this, as you'll understand why, because we were talking, and he said, look, the bottom line is the United States is not doing anything. You have a standard of living 20 times the average Indian citizen, and you're not willing to step up on this, and yet you're asking us to step up on it. And we're not going to do that. The new climate negotiator came in, expressed a more conciliatory view, but the actual actions we've seen really aren't changing that much. Even more so in China, there's huge issues in China where the central government policy is to reduce greenhouse gases, to support alternatives, to reduce local pollutants, which they have a huge problem with. And yet, they continue to build standard pulverized coal power plants and emit huge amounts of local pollutants and greenhouse gases. You know, you may have heard about 5 years ago when China passed the United States in greenhouse gas production, which was not really that much of a landmark because on a per capita basis we were still 5 times theirs, or 4 times. But China is now 30% above the United States. They are growing rapidly. I didn't put in, but there's a just stunning graph of coal use that shows everybody but China pretty much flat for the last 20 years, and China taking off at an exponential rate. It's on the blog, Energy Institute blog, if you're interested. The Chinese usage is, I think, a great demonstration of how difficult it will get to get cooperation. There are a lot of unresolved property rights issues. Who actually should get paid to reduce greenhouse gases and who should be paying to emit greenhouse gases. And one of the things I keep running into when I talk to people about this is the idea, but I've got a new technology, and my new technology, if you just price greenhouse gases at $50 a ton, is in the money. And what I say is, don't confuse a profitable small-scale business model with changing the world. There are a lot of things one can do that are profitable on a small scale, in part because they don't fundamentally shift the demand for oil. But that if we rolled them out on a large scale, they would reduce the demand for oil, the price of oil would collapse, and the business model would collapse. So there are a lot of things one can do that you can make money around the edges. A great example, by the way, is biodiesel. Biodiesel from recovered oil is in the money these days. It can save you money. Not biodiesel produced from plants, but from second-use oil. First of all, there's a very limited supply of that stuff, and second of all, because there's a very limited supply of that stuff, it's not going to reduce the demand for oil very much. And so as long as that's all anybody does, that's a profitable niche business. But if we actually rolled out something like that, and it had a big effect, it would become unprofitable very quickly. So this is where I've sort of turned to technology investments. And let me tell you a quick fable and reality. You remember the company Kodak? They used to make film. The older people are laughing. So Kodak used to make film, and they still may make a little bit of film. They're pretty much out of business. I think they're in bankruptcy. Let me tell you a different scenario. Let's say we had found out that silver hydride, I think that's the stuff that goes into film, was a pollutant. And we had tried to control it with a cap and trade market. And we had said, we're going to put a price on this stuff. And let's say it had had the effect that has happened to Kodak in the last 10 years, which is they've been driven out of business. Long before they were driven out of business, they would be in DC saying, look, your regulations are killing us. You can't, it's regulatory burden that is driving us out of business by putting a price on this pollutant. And they'd get a lot of traction with that because it would be the government killing them off. That's not what happened. Instead, digital photography came along. It turned out to be just as good and cheaper, and we all have one in our pocket right now. And Kodak's out of business, and they actually did make an appeal to the federal government to save them, but nobody listened to them. So whereas the regulatory approach is very difficult to be credible and consistent on, because when some loser from it comes to the politician and says, you're killing us, the politicians tend to be responsive. The technology approach, if it can succeed, is much more, as the economists put, dynamically consistent. You can credibly commit that if we actually invent something that drives you out of business, you're just out of business. It's not our problem. We've unleashed this new technology. And that's what happened with Kodak. It's also a lot easier to export intellectual breakthroughs than to enforce sacrifice. And the idea of pricing greenhouse gases these days basically comes down to asking the developing world to sacrifice. And it's not very well received. It also plays to the strength of the United States: invention, innovation, and particularly to California. I've been trying to push this in California as creating something like the Regenerative Medicine Institute that we started for alternative energy. Because I think that it's that sort of investment that we need to be making. When Obama came into office, he talked about a $15 billion per year investment in alternative energy. We're up to about $4 billion. But just to put that in context, $15 billion a year is $50 per person per year. If this is a potential catastrophic climate change, and of course compared to the Department of Defense budget or any war you want to name, it's not very much money. It seems like we should be putting more in. There are downsides. One is, and it's the one that if you're a scientist comes to mind, when I talk to my scientist friends, they say, whoa, whoa, we don't have the silver bullet. Don't sell this as if you just put enough money in, everybody gets cheap energy forever. And that's true. We don't have that solution. But we have seen tremendous technological progress over the decades in energy, and there are a lot of possibilities. It also requires picking winners. And the fact is, we do that all the time. We are picking winners. Pricing the market would be a great way, if we could do it, to do less picking winners. But even when we do that, we still need to be supporting basic R&D. We do it in medicine, we do it in science, we have to be doing it in energy. Until 2008, there really wasn't, we had a National Institute of Health, National Cancer Institute, National Science Foundation. We didn't have a National Energy Institute. The Department of Energy has sort of started to ramp up to become one, but it's just starting. Practical differences. I think right now California is very focused on how do we meet our greenhouse gas goals, and I think ultimately that could be helpful, but there's a counterproductive part of it, which is if you start doing things that really aren't exportable, that really aren't replicatable by other parts of the world, just to get over the hump, including some things that are sort of pretty clearly not reducing greenhouse gases. We are right now shipping corn ethanol to Brazil and importing sugar ethanol from Brazil because sugar ethanol has a smaller greenhouse gas footprint. But of course, if we're just exchanging ethanol, all we're doing is shipping. That's the only difference we're making. And so that sort of activity is not something we should be supporting. We're not going to learn anything. We're not going to do something that's exportable to the rest of the world by doing that sort of exchange of ethanol. And so we need to be much more focused on what will we learn and is this forecastable? More focus on learning and less on meeting specific goals. A downside of this, which I take seriously, and I'm just going to tell you the pros and cons, is that if what you think we need to do is show more leadership to get the developing world to go along, it's not as clear that this, I mean, the people who argue for California's greenhouse gas goals, the more sober people who argue for it say, look, we know this isn't going to change the world. But it sets a goal and shows that a major economy was able to do it. And that will inspire other people. And that may be right. I'm skeptical on it, but I certainly wouldn't dismiss it. And if we don't meet those goals, there is a cost in terms of showing leadership. It also would mean more focus on upstream research and development and less on the widespread adoption. Widespread adoption of technologies in the developed world. I've gotten this far in my talk without picking on rooftop residential solar, but let me just insert my usual rant here that we're doing a lot of rolling out residential solar. That's really a very, very expensive way to reduce greenhouse gases. I have nothing against it. If you want to put solar on your rooftop, go for it. But the idea that we're going to really change the fundamental climate change issue that way, there's not much evidence for that. Okay, so in the end, my argument is this is more of the same. This isn't a game changer. It's the same story we've been hearing for 100 years. There are breakthroughs in energy, and we have to recognize there are going to be more. We have to stop being surprised by that and start investing in that. Because this idea that we can sort of look at the current price of oil and that's the bogey we have to hit is just wrong. That price is going to get better. Those technologies are going to get better. Methane hydrate is going to get exploited. All these things are going to be happening. So what we need to be doing is giving more of a boost to the technologies that actually would be helpful when they come into existence. The best way and my preferred way to do that, or a major way to do that, is through profits. That is through pricing greenhouse gases to send the right signals. But government investment is also drives innovation, including, by the way, major investments that were a big part of this new technology that is now driving natural gas and oil production. So solving the most difficult challenge, which I view as climate change, is going to require global change, and I think that's where we really need to be focused. What can we produce that we can export that will help the rest of the world reduce their greenhouse gases? Not can we make it to some artificial goal in California or Berkeley or even the United States, because ultimately this is a problem that's got to be solved globally. And with that uplifting message, thank you very much. So we got about 10 minutes for questions. I guess you're supposed to go to the microphones if you don't mind, but if you yell out, I'm happy with it too. Bob will be mad though. Yes, sir.
If you have any more insight on it, can you talk a little bit about just the safety of that whole shale and fracking and?
So the question is about the safety of oil and of fracking and oil shale development, and I think I'm not going to say anything more. I'm an economist. I have talked to a lot of people who think that this can be done safely, but it does need to be regulated in a way that really pretty heavily. Let me just give you one example. One of the big concerns is fugitive methane, that is methane that leaks out during natural gas extraction. And I think the consensus is that if you really know what you're doing, you can very much limit this. If you don't know what you're doing, though, 2% of the methane escaping wipes out all the CO2 gains from using natural gas instead of coal. So you really do have to make sure you're doing that right. And I think there's increasing pressure with some industry support, because the industry, particularly after seeing the oil spill in the Gulf, recognizes that one person screwing this up, BP in that case, punishes the entire industry. And so the producers, many of the large producers are more interested now in having the regulation that's going to keep those sorts of problems from existing. But that's basically all I know. Yes, sir.
Oh, great talk. Thanks for being here. I mean, I think what do you think about selling? I mean, I think the cap and trade is just, I think it's such a complex thing, and Americans hate complexity. They hate big government, you know, and so it's so easy to attack it, and it is so complicated. I mean, so maybe another way would be, of course, carbon tax. But then if you could sell the carbon tax as a way to reduce the deficit, then people kind of understand it. You're taxing something that's, you know, bad for the environment, you know, has a cost on society versus, you know, taxing what we tax now, which is income and you know, innovation, which is good. So if you sold it as deficit reduction, it's a lot simpler. People kind of understand it. It's not necessarily a big program. You say we take that money and put it back in the deficit, or even give you know, give it back. You know,
what's called cap and return, where everybody gets money back. Yeah.
Just a simple tax on, you know,
yeah.
carbon tax.
So I want to remind you where cap and trade came from. Cap and trade came politically from people saying that at least it's not a tax. And so there was a big focus on it. It avoids the T word. And the irony is people are now saying, well, maybe we can do a tax because it's not cap and trade. And so, you know, I'm with you 100% that if we could figure out a way to tax greenhouse gases, there's still a lot of implementation issues that aren't unique to cap and trade, of monitoring of leakage if you do it on a small scale area. But I would be all for it. The problem, I think, is almost entirely political. And I've been in meetings with senators and congressmen who say, you know, we're going to go for this. And cap and return was one of the policy initiatives. And they just haven't gotten traction. You know, the response among some is there's no such thing as a tax where the revenue gets returned. The government always just wastes it. And yeah, in the back.
Yeah, hi. Thanks again for the talk. Wondering if there's some technologies now that you would pick as your winners, or do you think that the best ones out there have yet to be, they're just a glimmer in our eye before we dump big money into this R&D effort you speak of?
Well, this is also out of my expertise, but you know, solar has become drastically cheaper. Not residential, that's not how it should be deployed. But solar PV has just gone massively down in price to the point that a production cost of solar PV of 10 cents a kilowatt hour is perfectly plausible now. And it will probably get cheaper still. Even with the overbuild we have in the solar industry, prices will probably rise a little bit as a result of that, but not very much, my calculations, based on sort of the capital intensity of the industry. So I think that's very exciting. But I wouldn't bet on any one of these. I would like to see a lot more money put into building a pilot carbon capture and sequestration plant, which we started to do and then abandoned. Modular nuclear power. You know, all of these, we just really do have to have an all-in perspective when it comes to the R&D side. And we're just not putting enough money into that to really give all of these a shot. And not just in the basic science level, but downstream as well. That doesn't mean we spend to roll out these things forever, but it does mean we pay for the pilots of a lot of stuff, and most of it fails or doesn't do very well. But we learn a lot from it. And that's the role the government should be playing, is boosting the learning that we can get. Because you know, it's going to be really hard to export a greenhouse gas tax to the developing world. If we actually come up with a competitive alternative technology, it'll be pretty easy to export that. Yes, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
The use of new fuels from plant materials, you mentioned cellulose, ethanol, and so forth, didn't figure much here. I'm just wondering, do you see any importance for that?
Oh, no, this is another area I think we should be spending a lot more money to research and to set up pilots. I talked to one of my former students, who I don't think is here today, I talked to recently, is working on a biofuels project that is a plant-based biofuel. They think they can do it at $3 a gallon right now. He had taken my class, so he said, yeah, I know that doesn't do it. And he said, we really need to cut that in half at least. And I think that's right. At $3 a gallon, by the way, he can probably make money on a small scale. If he doesn't do too much of it and the world doesn't change too much, for a while he can make money, but he understands that's not a world changer. You can get it down to $1.50 a gallon, it's potentially a world changer. So we need to do that, and we need to spend the money to find those technologies. We are doing some of that at basic science level, and of course a lot of it hasn't worked. You know, I started studying energy in 1976 as an undergraduate, and cheap batteries were just around the corner then, and they're still just around the corner. And so some of this stuff is going to turn out to be a lot harder. Nuclear fusion was also just around the corner. And that's not even just around the corner now. And so we're going to lose on a lot of these investments, and that's okay. It's not that much money, given the threat we face, I think.
Do you see pricing greenhouse gases spilling into other industries that produce a lot of greenhouse gases, like meat production for human consumption, when it's unrelated to energy? But
wait, what was the question? Do I see it?
The charges for producing a lot of greenhouse gases actually spilling into other industries.
Oh, yeah.
Because
no,
of the
this is
methane
actually,
production.
I have a whole paper on this about the problem of all the property rights we haven't defined yet. That, for instance, cow burps, which turn out to be a major source of greenhouse gases. What do we do about all of those greenhouse gases that are uncovered? And the fact is that if we were going to get serious, we would have to figure out a way to cover them. Covering them could mean offsets. Turns out offsets, that is paying people to do less of it. Turns out that's very difficult to do in a verifiable, consistent way. But just monitoring is going to be tough. So charging for them is also going to be tough, which is, again, why I think that while we should be pursuing pricing, we also have to be pursuing technologies that can replace a lot of this energy, a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, sir.
I have a follow-up on the biofuels. What are the economics on corn ethanol, and do you have any insight into the tax policy associated with that?
Oh, yeah. So the economics on corn ethanol is that you can actually produce corn ethanol on a reasonable scale in a way that is almost energy competitive with gasoline. Now, the ethanol industry just is misleading about this. They talk about gallons to gallons, but ethanol has 30% less energy per gallon. But on an energy equivalent basis, it's almost economic at times. The greenhouse gas footprint of that ethanol is almost the same as gasoline. We're not doing anything by using corn ethanol. We're just spinning our wheels. Some people make the energy independence argument, and I think that's probably mostly nonsense. So the corn ethanol is not going to solve the problem. And then, by the way, while I'm picking on them, the Renewable Fuels Association makes these completely unfounded claims that corn ethanol has brought down the price of gasoline. And it's sort of a great example for the statistics class of not understanding correlation versus causality, because they show two lines, and my colleague Chris Knittel, who's now at MIT, showed that basically it was just a time trend, and he has a footnote in his paper showing that corn ethanol has also made his son grow older by the same logic. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Severin, a very interesting talk. I was very interested, intrigued by your comment, and maybe I didn't pick up on this earlier, that you do not support what I heard was distributed solar generation, and much more supportive, or much more think that there's something to a centralized energy source for solar, or generative source for solar. And that kind of goes against my grain, and I'm wondering, are you taking into account considerations such as grid stability, such as the ability to get the value and at the retail level, the point of delivery or use, and how does that factor into your thoughts, or what's driving that?
So it's not that I don't support it. If you want to do it, I'm all for it. But I don't think the government should be subsidizing more of it. I think we've learned what we're going to learn in terms of, or almost all we've learned in terms of rooftop installation. The problem is the rooftop installation. Just to be clear, the problem is not that they don't work on rooftops. The problem is that it's much more expensive to put solar panels on rooftops. Yes, it saves land, and you have to account for that, but that turns out to be fairly minor. The grid stability question is an open question of whether it's a plus or a minus. I'm actually starting to do some work on that. The retail price avoidance is not an open question. That's just a transfer. That's not saving society money. That's just saying you don't have to pay the outrageous fourth-tier price of PG&E, which is 38 cents a kilowatt hour. But that's not PG&E's marginal cost. That's what they're doing to recover their fixed costs. And if you don't pay it, what happens is they just raise their rates and everybody else pays it. So part of it is our current tariff structure is encouraging solar in an inefficient way. I think there should be a real price on greenhouse gases, and when there is a real price on greenhouse gases, even residential solar will get a bit of a bump. But to be honest, I think it's a lot, and I'm not saying it couldn't be more efficient, but right now, it's just not the most efficient way to deploy it. What could change? A couple things, and then I will let you guys go to lunch. One last question. Is one thing that could change is materials integrated solar. But that's going to only be in new buildings. We're not going to, but the retrofit solar, I think, is just not going to make it. Last question.
So Severin, it's great to see you. Thank you for doing this. I'm the South Bay Silicon Valley chapter leadership, and we haven't had you down probably in 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, I'll have to.
And I remember when you came down, we had a great event. You were fabulous, and I remember one of the big questions was peak theory. You know, that was
peak oil.
Yeah. So. But you know, I remember, I reflect back to my much-loved economics courses. I actually did love economics. It's a bizarre thing, but the concept of external cost. And I'm kind of stuck on this idea that, you know, the price of oil should reflect the external cost, and that would be a way of dealing with the greenhouse gas tax. And my big concern is, if there's so much tech going into fossil fuel and the price is coming down, that really hurts alternative clean tech, because at the higher price it becomes more viable to develop those technologies. And I think that having some sort of externality-based tax or additional cost to fossil fuel, not as a way to affect global demand or price or global usage, but to incubate that clean. I mean, is that something that's being talked about?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, no. How real is that?
No, absolutely. People talk about it. The problem is, functionally, it's exactly the same thing as, I mean, and I focused on what would it do to gas prices, but functionally, it does all these things. It depresses demand for the fossil fuels. It increases the price of the fossil fuels. It increases the competitiveness of the alternative energy. All of that is a greenhouse gas tax or an externality tax. I'm happy to call it an externality.
It's less objective. It's more objective in the sense that it's not, you're not trying to decide who to tax. It's just the purchasing.
No, and that's not the problem. The problem is there are a lot of, so the problem is we are giving away those externalities for free right now, right? And some people are big consumers of the right to give away the externalities. People in states with low density, people who drive big cars, people who live greenhouse gas intensive lives. Those people are going to be losers when you put a price on it. And those people don't like that fact, and they are fighting it. If we could do it, I would be all for it. The problem is that, I have been fighting for it for a decade at least now, and the problem is that there's just not much on the horizon that says we could do it. We got to stop. It's 12:35. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy lunch.